Final word, Ben Collins, I have with me down the line from India, Annesha Ghosh, who's been covering diligently the Women's Premier League. We've been promising, Annesha, to A, get you on at some point, and B, have a proper wrap-up conversation of the Women's Premier League, and here we are doing just that. And I'm catching you just before you're flying out to the Fair Break Invitational in Hong Kong, where we will catch up next week. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Adam. Yes, looking forward to meeting you at the Fair Break Invitational 2023. I've just returned to my hometown, Calcutta, for half a day to collect some of my gear after having wrapped up the inaugural Women's Premier League in Mumbai. It was quite a memorable tournament, and looking forward to the second edition of what was a memorable inaugural edition of the Fair Break Invitation.
Let's zoom into what happened over the weekend in India, then go back to the broader picture and your reflections on the tournament as a whole. So in the eliminator, Mumbai ended up smashing the UP Warriors. We were quite taken by the Z on the end of the Warriors name in our coverage on our podcast here. Thanks in no small part to Izzy Wong's hat-trick, Mumbai making 182 for 4, Nat Siva Brunt 72 not out from 38 balls, if you don't mind, with help from Amelia Kerr, Hayley Matthews, and Yastika Bhatia. Warriors all out for 110. They were 3 for 21 early after losing Healy, which was also a wicket of Izzy Wong. And they got McGrath also in the power play. But then Wong goes bang, bang, bang in the 13th over, and it's pretty much game over. So it meant that it was going to be a Delhi Capitals, Mumbai Indians final. Two of the bigger teams in the RPL, Annesha, who've invested now in women's cricket thoroughly and have been rewarded accordingly by reaching the final of the first edition.
Absolutely. And if you look at the way the two teams, Mumbai Indians and the Delhi Capitals, finished in the league stage, they were the top two ranked teams. Delhi Capitals picked the Mumbai Indians on the top of the points table by virtue of a superior net run rate. But both of them heading into the tournament were really the teams to beat. The third team, which also was something of a team to beat, but really, really fell short of expectations by a huge margin, was the Royal Challengers Bangalore, who royally messed up their campaign. But sticking to the way Meg Lanning led her side, Meg Lanning, as you would have expected from a captain and a batter of her caliber, literally led from the front, finished as the tournament's highest run getter. Not surprising at all, because she was sort of struggling at the start of the 2023 T20 World Cup in February in South Africa. But as the World Cup progressed, thanks to India giving her a truckload of gifts, full tosses in the semi-final, which they eventually ended up losing, Lanning found her form, and she carried that form into the inaugural Women's Premier League. And as far as the Mumbai Indians concerned, they have had 3 of the world's best all-rounders, in my view. They had the services of Hayley Matthews, Amelia Kerr, Natalie Siva Brunt. All of them came to the party, and it wasn't just them performing in flashes. They were consistent throughout the tournament. So they could really rely on these 3 overseas recruits. They are not the Aussies. They did not have as big an Australian presence as, say, if you look at the Gujarat Giants or the UP Warriors. They went with a more England-heavy kind of overseas contingent, and Charlotte Edwards did make some of those right calls, and some of the right calls were also made by Julian Goswami, the mentor and bowling coach, in terms of recruiting some top-notch domestic cricketers like Saika Ishaq. Very few people knew about Saika Ishaq on the international circuit, but she's been a serial performer of sorts in the domestic competitions for Bengal, where Julian Goswami has played for a long time, and she's now a mentor for age group cricketers. And for Julian Goswami to have brought in that insight on the auction table, which is why it's so very important to have people familiar with the landscape, with the ecosystem, making those right decisions at the auction table. And I think Mumbai Indians won big at the auction table, which is what reflected in the way they performed in the league. And Harmanpreet Kaur, I think she was also striking immensely well in that T20 World Cup in February. She had perhaps the most heartbreaking of defeats as captain and player in that semi-final, that run out, which I'm pretty sure you've discussed at length on your podcast against Australia. It really cut short India's campaign. And as she has gone on to say, Harmanpreet did go on to say several times over, that the Indian contingent, as much as the overseas contingent at the Women's Premier League, barely had any time to collect themselves, dwell on their successes or defeats. But the Australians, 15, 16 of them turned up at the WPL. And as far as the Indians are concerned, they barely had any time to process the heartbreak of the semi-final. And here they were gearing up for a media frenzy that none of these players, Indians or otherwise, had ever faced in their lifetimes, in their careers before. And the tournament kicked off even before they knew. But as Harmanpreet Kaur very crucially mentioned after the post-final presser, where she appeared really happy, really cheerful, quite a far cry from that post-semi-final press conference in Cape Town, which I remember covering. She was holding back tears. And we all know, we've all seen that ICC clip of hers with Anjum Chopra. She was in tears after she left the press conference room at Newlands. But at the Ravan Stadium's Kuch Bihar room in Mumbai on the night of the 27th, the press conference began around 12:10 at night or in the morning, whichever way you want to put it. And Harmanpreet Kaur was at her most ebullient self, and she acknowledged the fact that because the turnaround time between the two tournaments, the World Cup and the WPL, was so short, it actually enabled her to move on very, very quickly. And all she needed to do is just focus on Mumbai Indians, because this was a new group she had to start out with, and literally start from scratch. And look the legacy they've already created in the inaugural edition, the first ever champions of the Women's Premier League in India.
Yeah, that's a great summary. So, like as you point out, the Mumbai Indians are Delhi Capitals, so they had such a successful recruiting spree, I suppose. You look the top 5 run scorers in the comp: Lanning, Natsima Brunt, Talia McGrath, Harmanpreet Kaur, Hayley Matthews, who was also player of the tournament, 271 runs and 16 wickets. And the same applies for the most part for the bowlers. And Ishak was the only bowler in the top 5 who doesn't have, I suppose, international name recognition. Try that again. So Matthews, Eccleston, Wong, Millie Kerr. Then you got sort of Kim Garth, Shikha Pandey, Nat Sivabrunt, Ash Gardner, who was the big money recruit at the start of the tournament. So you reach the final with these two, powerhouses of Delhi and Mumbai, and it's a close and great final. It doesn't look like it on paper with Mumbai winning by 7 wickets, but they did have to hold their nerve. I mean, Delhi got to 131 for 9, thanks largely to Meg Lanning and Shikha Pandey at the end, batting with Radha Yadav, putting on 52 for the 10th wicket after they were in all sorts to drag them from 79 for 9 up to 131 for 9. They took 20 off Wong's last over, and they took 16 from the 20th over, bowled by Nat Sivabrunt. Wong had taken 3 wickets earlier, albeit all with full tosses, but that happens. That's cricket. Then she had a pretty good tournament overall. Then Mumbai were behind the rate when they had Harmanpreet Kaur and Nat Sivabrunt batting through the middle overs, but they did stabilise things after losing Matthews inside the power play. I think they were 2 for 23. They took it to 3 for 95 when Capsey executed a brilliant run out to start the 17th over, and that was Harmanpreet. You mentioned the run out in the World Cup semi being run out again, but she did make 37 and did have that stand of 72 with Siva, but they were left 37 from 23 balls. Enter Muley Kerr, who batted all the way through to the end with Sivabrunt. It was a great finish, the reverse off Capsey in that same over after they lost Harmanpreet to get their momentum going again, Mumbai. Then there was a tidy over from Shikha Pandey, leaving all this pressure in the final 2 overs, but they went after Jess Jonathan, and that's not easy to do. That's that class sweep shot from Sivabrunt to reach her 50. Then Kerr goes bang bang to finish that over and effectively finish the tournament. So Mumbai Indians get the job done under the captaincy. Well, the captaincy of Harmanpreet, but the coaching of Charlotte Edwards. They had Julan Goswami, as you're describing there. They had Lydia Greenway with all of her experience in that dugout. And I suppose that's more where I wanted to take the conversation away from the cricket itself and more to the piece she wrote in The Guardian last week about the importance of the competition. This ended up being almost like a global all-stars comp, not only on the field, but off the field as well. And the media attention it was generating, those physical advertisements you were writing about, huge skyscrapers in Mumbai with massive pictures of the papers that would have been inconceivable when both of us started covering women's cricket.
Absolutely, Adam. And on the eve of the final came by far the biggest surprise. The Air India building, which has been, a sort of landmark in Mumbai. It stands with pride on the Nariman Point, overlooking the Arabian Sea. the Air India building was lit up in the colors of all 5 franchises, the WPL logo. The 2 captains were projected onto the Air India building in the form of a light show. Meg Lanning and Harmanpreet Kaur with the Tata WPL trophy on a building as iconic as that. Remember, it was also around that, vicinity that the 26/11 terrorist attacks took place. So there's a lot of history around that location, around that building, and to see women's cricket take pride of place in that manner, I've never seen like that, in my career or in my lifetime. And pretty much all of the people I was doing box pops with, youngsters, young people, old people, neither they had come across something as in your face an advertisement around women's sport in our country. So credit to the BCCI. Sure, it has taken longer than it should have for something along the lines of a men's IPL for the women to get off, but the way the BCCI went about marketing and packaging the tournament, it's been really quite something. And to see that event transpire, pan out in front of the Air India building, and also the way the 5 franchises marketed their teams, really put out content, pieces after pieces on their social media channels. I think for the longest time, those of us have been covering women's cricket in India. I think there has been an acute paucity of content around women's cricketers for the longest time. I mean, even if you look at publications, it was given or meted out sunny treatment for the longest time in terms of how editorial decisions are made. But to see so many publications at the press box, national and international, send their correspondence every single game, it was a first for me. I mean, it is what that eventually will send out the messaging around the WPL to people who who buy newspapers every day. And the print presence in India, especially in regional languages, is still very strong. It's all not digital. To see the regional and English language newspapers and digital agencies, digital publications sending their journalists to the Cricket Club of India press box and the D.Y. Patil Stadium, the 2 venues for the inaugural WPL, I think that will really help create a legacy of literature around women's cricket, which has been sort of non-existent to a great extent.
Yeah, that was really clear to me at the 2017 World Cup when the tournament started, and Madali Raj had like 5,000 Twitter followers or something like that. Like, how's this possible when she's got this extraordinary career and the population of India? But that's obviously changed an awful lot. It rather sort of focuses the attention on the precursor to the WPL. I can't remember what it was called now, but how ill-considered it was to leave it this long. What was it? The challenge or the IPL?
The Women's T20 Challenge.
Whatever it was, it looks ridiculous now that they waited all this time to get where they are, given it's now already the second most expensive or second most lucrative league in the world behind the men's IPL. And it looked like the attendances followed suit. I mean, they weren't getting 50,000 to a game as Australia and India did last year, but crowds that were about halfway to that mark, and they did a good job of making sure that was it the girls and women didn't have to pay to get in, and they were quite cheap tickets for men as well.
That's right. So throughout the league phase, entry was free for female spectators, and male spectators had to pay anywhere between 100 to 400, if I'm not mistaken. But come the eliminator and the final, free entry was no longer existent, which is what made the progression of the tournament quite interesting follow in terms of how the BCCI was looking at testing, various scenarios in terms of how to really market in-stadia attendances for the WPL. And 30,000 people turning up, 30,000 plus. In fact, the eliminator had about 37,000 people turning up. Yeah. And going by the looks of it, the CCI, which has much lower capacity than the D.Y. Patil Stadium, where the capacity is around 49, 48,000, whereas CCI has about 80, 90,000. If you take into consideration all the seats that have been blocked because of various stages being set, platforms having been erected. The final, I would say, had close to easily over 16, 17,000 people. So that's nearly 75,000 nearly 75% of the stadium having been filled out. To my surprise, and what I would rate as one of the topmost topmost ingredients that should be looked upon as a success or looked upon as a testimony to the success of the WPL is the weekday attendances. I mean, people in Mumbai and Navi Mumbai turning up in numbers on Monday afternoons for 3 p.m. local time matches and for 7:30 p.m. local time matches. What was their motivation? I mean, that's something I did ask a few of the male spectators, because the number of men coming in to watch these games were far more than the female spectators who, as I mentioned earlier, had free entry. So men were the actual ticketed paid spectators who were coming in. So what was their motivation like to walk in at 3 p.m. In sweltering heat? You know, Navi Mumbai was hot. It wasn't as though they were sitting in air conditioning all through the game. So that speaks to the appetite that is there around women's cricket, as we saw during the India versus Australia bilateral series at these very two venues in December 2022. And the DY Patil Stadium really has done well. Credit to the organizers there, because the DY Patil Stadium in October last year hosted the final of the FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup. It was one of the many venues across India, but the way they were able to interest the local crowd, DY Patil Stadium is located some 35 kilometers off Mumbai. So Navi Mumbai is not part of Mumbai. You have to make significant effort to get to Navi Mumbai from any which where you're coming from around Maharashtra, especially if you are based in Mumbai. So the options that you have really in terms of conveyance is either take a train, board a bus. If you have a private car, nothing like it, but you cannot get there easily. So that also speaks volumes about the intent behind people turning up in numbers. So there is appetite for women's cricket. There is appetite for women's sport. The 2022 December India-Australia series set the template of sorts, which is why the BCCI eventually chose DY Patil Stadium, Navi Mumbai, and the Cricket Club of India Brabourne Stadium in Mumbai as the two venues, and both venues delivered big.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's the home of women's cricket now. Absolutely, there's no doubting that after what that's happened at that ground, and as you say, the Australia series last year, and now being the one of the two homes of the WPL, you could see Jay Shah in the crowd laughing towards the end of that final. He'd be just laughing through his wallet as well, not literally, but the BCCI's coffers, and how this will add to that over time. We saw with the TV money that came in beforehand, the numbers of people watching as well for advertising, free streams, easy to access. You know, having a game at 7:30 every night. They seem to get a lot right in terms of the build up to this, even if there were things we could poke at. Like, for example, and there are negatives, I mean, or at least areas worth criticising, such as what I felt were regressive boundaries. So I thought we'd moved away from 45-metre boundaries in women's cricket, but there was a desire to see high scoring. So that was a bit of a throwback, and a mockery made of that when Sophie Devine hit like a 100-metre six or something like that. And there were other sort of I guess complicating factors, Annesha, around overseas players. In the men's IPL, there is enough local Indian talent that you can. This is my understanding of it. When you are comprising your 11 and you have your overseas allotment filled, there'll be a player who misses out, but it doesn't seem to affect the team too badly. Here, when Grace Harris had to miss games, or Shabin Ismail was rotated out, it seemed to really affect the team balance, because the next step is obviously going to be making sure the Indian domestic players get taken to the next level as well. And I suppose that's in keeping with the hashtag, right? It's only the beginning.
Absolutely. And to that end, I think the team that really stood out in delivering or living up to the essence, the principle of that hashtag, and also the principle behind starting a women's Premier League, which is to groom the next generations of Indian domestic talent, to build a proper feeder line to the Indian national team, which is still bereft of a world title. The senior team is a World Cup less side. Even after all these years, so many of the stalwarts have retired. Julian Goswami, Mithali Raj hung up their boots without a world title. And here is Harmanpreet Kaur, who keeps making these World Cup finals, leading her side to the World Cup knockouts, but eventually falls short. And the way the UP Warriors really bought or thrust their domestic talent to the fore, I think they deserve a shout out on this show, and they have been covered pretty well as well. Because Alisa Healy at the start of the WPL, told the press that she's won everything that is there to be won, really. Be it at the WBBL or as far as the Australian side is concerned. But here she was on a mission to ensure that the next generation of uncapped and capped Indian talent finds the right kind of encouragement and exposure through the 22 match league, and she walked the talk, because here we saw Parshavi Chopra, an under-19 World Cup winner, having won the inaugural under-19 World Cup campaign under Shufali Verma in January. Parshavi is a leg spinner. She was outstanding in the eliminator, and she got several other opportunities. Shweta Sehrawat, the vice captain of the India under-19 inaugural World Cup winning side, also part of the UP Warriors, who got to make several appearances in the starting 11. So they were not just warming the bench. Maybe to that end, Delhi Capitals, led by Meg Lanning, played somewhat conservatively, because it was only Minnu Mani, the uncapped Indian, who got a look in. Sneha Deepthi is another very good domestic uncapped player who warmed the bench essentially. But Mumbai Indians, for their part, also gave several of the uncapped players opportunities. Saika Ishak, as we mentioned earlier, she was outstanding. She reaped great dividends for not just Mumbai Indians, but I think she has given a glimpse into what sort of domestic talent there can be if you do the right kind of scouting. And Jintimani Kalita, Amanjot Kaur, who has played only one international match, having debuted during the Tri-Series featuring South Africa earlier this year. Amanjot Kaur, Jintimani Kalita for Mumbai Indians stood out with their fielding. If I could sort of pick holes in terms of the quality of the WPL, the fielding standards could have been better, especially from the Indian players. But Jintimani Kalita and Amanjot Kaur literally won them a couple of games by just effecting those runouts, saving those boundaries in the deep. So as far as giving opportunities to Indian talent is concerned, and as I mentioned in that spin piece in The Guardian, or as you rightly spoke of the hashtag, this is just the beginning. I think we've only just started to see where Indian domestic talent is, but it doesn't really make much sense for a tournament like this unless you give them opportunities in the starting 11. To that end, Alisa Healy and John Lewis really deserves a lot of praise, because I wouldn't be surprised if UP Warriors, who finished third in the competition, having been eliminated in the eliminator, want to win the title next year, because they have seen what their youngsters can bring. And Deepthi Sharma might go on to lead the UP Warriors someday, who was the deputy to Alisa Healy for this season. So to give opportunities to youngsters and Indian talent is also very important. And for an overseas captain to have bought into that principle the way Alisa Healy did, I think that is also a victory for WPL and UP Warriors.
Annesha, that's a lovely nod to the future as we finish our conversation. Thanks so much for jumping on a day where I know you're traveling again. You've been so busy recently. You've done a great job covering the inaugural WPL. Thanks for your insights today on the final word, and looking forward to talking to you at Fair Break next week.
Absolutely, Adam. Look forward to that.